Okay, Greg, thank you very much. And was enlightening to hear some of the discussion and the work that we're doing. Hopefully, it'll contribute to the thinking. I know Governor Bowman gave the way they're looking at things, and it's good to hear that it's consistent with some of the thoughts that we have in the paper. And as mentioned, unexpected gains, how fewer community banks boost local investment and economic development. It's done with Bernadette Minton, and she's right there. So I'm pointing her out only if there's any really complicated questions, she's going to have to answer them. And Alvaro Tabarada from Mississippi State University. So we'll move on here. So, okay. It's not, okay, it's okay now? Okay, okay, backwards. All right, has stated before, so we have a nice a figure here of what's happened to the number of community banks over the past couple of decades, a little bit more than that, and we were looking at 1999 to 2019. We stopped in 2019, wanted to avoid effects of the pandemic, so that's why we're there. And the orange here tells you the banks we've lost, or the reduction in banks by year. In the blue, look on the right-hand side, is just a slope of how banks are going down from around 8,500 banks are down to about 4,800 over this time period. And again, it happened before this, and it continues to happen. So this is just over the time period of our sample. Some failures, which happened predominantly around when we had a banking crisis. Let's let the flow over time give you a visual sense of what's going on here. So what's the concern? The concern here, the community banks, vital for community development. And so we look at it particularly as it relates to small business lending. So that's the area that we're looking at. And of course, the other things the banks do, but that's the focus we're looking at. And from the SBA, small businesses have accounted for about 66% of employment growth over the past 25 years. And so just from a political standpoint, Sherrod Brown, a senator from the state of Ohio, statement says, well, consolidation also harms small businesses. Study after study has documented how following bank mergers, small business lending dries up and available loans become more expensive. Consolidation among banks also supports consolidation in non-financial industries, undermining small enterprises. So the loss of small business from the standpoint, at least politically and otherwise, is very detrimental to the growth of small businesses and also the general economy. A lot of work in our business with large banks goes the aggregate amount of the economy, but small banks are quite important for the mainstream effect, as we like to think about. And so in this paper, what are we asking? Does the decline in the number of community banks lead to a decrease in small business lending, which in turn has adverse effects on community economic development? So that's the overall question we're trying to ask, given the downward slope that you've seen, and the view of, well, fewer community banks, fewer lending to small businesses could have a detrimental effect. So how do we do this? We investigate the impact of small business loan originations in a county on community economic development. And we'll kind of talk a bit about how we assess economic development. Then we analyze how the loss of community banks really impacts local SBL originations. All right. Finally, and what are the potential implications of the reduction? Right, number of community banks and community development. So we look at it from that standpoint, sort of from the bottom up, rather than looking at large banks that we may think from the top down at an aggregate level. So just what are the findings? So what do we find here? We say the growth in SBL originations is positively associated with the measures of community economic growth. So again, first we test, well, is this really true, right? We hear the statements from the SBA, and the belief, the first step is like, is this really true? Even though intuitively we think that's the case. And how do we measure growth, right? We said the number of small establishments, right? That's something, that's my economic development. Secondly, we look at job creation, total employment in the county, and also total employment by small establishments. Small establishments are those with below 50 or below employees. So we're thinking about really small businesses here. And these positive results remain across county types, including distressed counties and also underserved. And underserved counties are you can think about as rural counties, right? That's what we for underserved counties. And the bottom line here, growth in SBL originations are important for economic development. So what you read on the first page is about right? So that's just, and as a researcher, is the underlying assumption appropriate, and that's what we find. And so what do we actually find? Loss in community bank, community investment. The loss of community bank increases local SBL origination. Everyone's saying, wow, wait, that's not what I thought. Mainly in counties, but it's mainly in counties where the closed community bank had a physical presence. So when the community bank, when there is a consolidation, the acquirer stays in the county. That's what the main driver of the effect, right? And so then we first address the question that everyone always asks: what about fintechs? What's going on in fintechs? It's the fintechs, right? It's with this. So we kind of look at that directly, and in this table, as we look at it, we say, well, when you control for fintechs, and we call it, for their share, and the share of loans deposited from the top 4 banks, and with all the controls in there for bank characteristics, county characteristics, we say, well, it's still there, okay? And that's the first line in that's bold there, that is still there, that there is a growth. Now, there also is a growth in fintechs, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but when the top 4 banks are there, that actually works in the opposite direction for SB lending, okay? And so we kind of go through what is going on here. How can we really explain what's going on when it's this counterintuitive result that we expect for there to be a decline, but it's not, okay? And so we kind of go about it in 4 different ways. Are certain counties more likely to lose community banks? That's sort of the first question. Secondly, are the results driven by certain county characteristics? Is it a county characteristic that's driving the results? Are results driven by the consolidated characteristics? When there's a consolidation, there's something that's being done that also impacts the results. And finally, is there something going on at the macro structural level that kind of answers the question in a way that goes against, as we mentioned, this intuition that I think most of us probably had in advance. So in walking through this, and so the first thing we say, which counties are more likely to lose a bank? Okay, so thinking about the county characteristics here. The counties that are more likely to lose a bank are in distressed counties, right? Less likely to lose a bank are distressed counties, right? Less likely counties with a higher bank deposit concentration, a lot of banks at the deposit location, right? A larger share of small establishments and better capitalized banks, right? And those are counties that are less likely to lose a bank. One point here that most of our data is from the Community Reinvestment Act, to look at, to get bank level lending information. The ones that are more likely to lose a community bank are underserved counties, against more rural counties, counties with a higher population growth, higher average wages, right? A larger share of deposits by the big 4 banks. Again, when they're present, community banks are more likely to go away. Banks with higher non-performing loans, right? So where we have worse banks. And also, on the other hand, a higher share of deposit from community banks, sort of a measure of concentration and competition in the local area. So left-hand side, less likely, right-hand side, are more likely, okay, to lose a bank. So the next movement here is the question we're asking: does lending after the closures vary by county type, right? And so as we say, increase in SB lending, and we look at the local target county. When we say the county or the community, and by definition we say community, we measure that by the county. And another point is, for us, a community bank, and this linked to what Governor Bowman was saying, it's just this cutoff. $10 billion, right? and the community is the county, right? Just to keep it simple. And her suggestion, let's get away from that, but we're doing it anyway because she didn't tell us this when we were writing the paper. All right, so with primarily local target counties, where we look at with ex-ante concentration of community banks, right? Those are the ones that are typically increasing lending. There's a lot of community banks already there when the consolidation happened, and where the entity keeps a local presence. But there's two caveats here. One is this only works when the presence is a community bank. When a large bank makes the acquisition and stays there, it doesn't matter. Okay, the opposite happens. Okay, so that's not a general. It's just for community banks, and it's driven in part by SB lending by other incumbent banks. So if there are other community banks there, when there's a consolidation, everyone sort of starts lending more to small businesses. All right, now, and so what's going on? What could explain what's going on structurally, right? And a lot of it, and we said, well, if you look at the size, the average size of community banks, at the median, over our sample period, at the mean, they've almost doubled in size, so under 300 million to close to 600 million. At the median, about $100 million or so to over $200 million, and that's the mean and median size. So community banks are getting larger, okay? And we'll talk about some of the drivers here, which you've heard already. Cost of technology. The people look in and say there's a cost to being a bank. As that increases, then banks need to be larger, and so that's one of the drivers that we'll talk about more in a second here. And so, and we look at what's going on sort of structurally as well. There's a change in focus over time. So when you look at large banks against the banks that are over 10 billion versus community banks under 10 billion, and then some of the work by other papers on community banks, on fintechs, and fintechs if you look at the financial crisis, one struggle we have right now is separating financial crisis from fintech, because fintechs grew, crisis happened, splitting those two is quite difficult, especially over time, because everything happened at the same time. So we're kind of trying to disentangle that, but that's a little bit difficult. So if we look at $100,000 loan as a break point, if you look on the left over here, on this, okay, if we look at small SBL originations against on the 100,000, we see that large banks are increasing, okay? Probably driven by lending technology for these smaller loans, okay? And from a prior study by Phil Schnabel, is that this fintech firms are also very active in smaller SBL loans, smaller again being under 100,000. Given the increased size of community banks, we see that community banks on the right-hand side here are increasing loans for larger small business loans. By larger, again, we mean above 100,000, okay? So we see that the larger community banks are lending more, but more of their loan are to larger small businesses, okay? That makes sense. And the larger banks are making the smaller loans, all right? So now to the conclusion here, and stay within time, we say these are if we think about policy responses, goes back to the discussion earlier, to the effects of community banks. And like with most things, where I was happy to hear the discussion, it's a little bit nuanced. So this one-size-fits-all approach normally doesn't work out very well, and we hear that a lot, and it supports the idea that that is not the case. And so if you just simply responding with one response is probably not going to work. County level characteristics and consolidated entity decisions should be a part of the consideration, right, in the reduction of these banks. Secondly, changing in the small business lending landscape is also a very important consideration. Acknowledging the fact, for instance, that there are fintech firms out there, and by fintech we mean non-deposit receiving institutions, right? And so that's the broader classification here. and also emerging lending technologies. And we know that applies not just to firms, but also individuals, so be able to deal with those particular issues as well. And operational costs. Investments in technology and the like are also important considerations. So as we consider these regulatory responses, we have to, again, one size fits all doesn't work, look more broadly at county effects, consolidation effects, and other factors that are going on. And that's it, and 15 seconds over. But, okay.
Thanks, Rohan.